Now, former Green Party leader Baroness Natalie Bennett joins me. Natalie, I don't think it takes a genius to assume that you probably don't support further exploitation of North Sea oil and gas.
It's lovely to be with you, but it is absolutely a day of infamy. I think you really nailed what's happening when you said this is basically rhetoric. We've got a government that wants to. Rishi Sunak is coming out and saying we're going to drill, max out on our climate damage. We're going to fuel the profits of the oil and gas companies, while actually it'll be ordinary people who have to pay for that. Because if we want energy security and the cheapest energy, then we still have a government that's doing nothing about onshore wind. We still have a government that's been wholly ineffective in giving us warm, comfortable, affordable to heat homes, which would both make us healthier and cut our carbon emissions. So what we have is gesture politics, and really some arguments that might even make Donald Trump blush with their utter factual basis. The suggestion of hostile states relying on them. Well, 3/4 of our gas imports come from Norway, which last time I looked was not a hostile state.
Well, I mean, the government would argue, new analysis quoted by the government shows that domestic gas production has 1/4 of the carbon footprint of imported LNG. And we know very well that over Christmas we had to import a lot of LNG from Qatar, for example. Surely, as we transition to greener fuels, greener power, we will rely on, to some degree, on fossil fuels to bring up the base load of our grid.
We have fossil fuels which we have to slash our production of. We have to slash our usage of. That doesn't mean we have to put the production up. This is heading absolutely in the wrong direction. And if the government keeps pointing to Qatar and LNG, and of course we absolutely want to minimise that, but the Norwegian gas, which is the bulk of what we're importing, actually has a lower carbon footprint because Norway has tougher rules, something that I and other members of the House of Lords have really been pushing the government on. We're still flaring off gas, just burning off gas out of the North Sea, literally heating the planet. No one's benefiting from it.
Is it not better?
Norway banned that decades ago.
Is it not better then we clean up our own acts? Because at the moment, as far as I can tell, if we continue to import fossil fuels from Norway or whoever it may be, they are the ones gaining the big advantage of sovereign wealth funds with profits, especially as the energy wholesale price goes up. And we're essentially missing out and actually putting green levies on everybody, which hurts the poorest in society the most.
Well, of course, the poorest in society are living in a really cold, damp, difficult to heat homes, and that's because the government has utterly failed to do the absolute common sense thing. The cheapest, cleanest, best possible energy you can have is the energy you don't need to use. We are profligately wasting energy because we've failed to invest in our homes. We've failed to invest in the active transport, walking and cycling. Your political editor was just talking about bus travel. Bus travel is enormously important to the poorest, and yet bus services around the country have been slashed. So we're pushing people to use cars, to have cars, that really expensive mode. And what we should be doing them is giving them a really practical, affordable alternative. And that's good for people and good for the planet.
I mean, Natalie, do you think people are sort of joining you on this crusade? Because my impression is that all the activities of Just Stop Oil, for example, are rather putting people off climate change and green policies, and essentially just frustrating people and making people sort of think, oh, God, the good old days when we could extract fossil fuels.
Well, no, I know that many people are deeply concerned about the health of their children. When you talk about ULEZ, when you talk about low traffic neighbourhoods, those are primarily a public health measure. Burning fossil fuels is actually bad for our health. Air pollution in London, just to pick one figure, 4,000 people a year die prematurely as a result of burning fossil fuels. Even within your own home, we're increasingly understanding that burning gas, cooking with gas is really bad for people's health. We have a deeply unhealthy society. We should be looking for measures that will actually start to tackle that. And the kind of measures we're talking about, they're not just measures that cut our carbon emissions. They're also measures that actually create a healthier society. And when you look at, so many people unable to work because of ill health, the general state of our society, we urgently need that action.
Natalie Bennett, a former Green Party leader, thank you ever so much for coming on the programme. Peter is still with me and my panel are back. Peter, I've got to go to you first because I saw you shaking your head. At the corner of my eye, yes. I saw a little Peter Cardwell no.
Well, indeed. Well, that 4,000 claim, which many Green activists, including Natalie Bennett, make, is just not the case. There are not 4,000 people in London dying because of nitrous oxide in the air, and a ULEZ will not solve that necessarily. That is an extrapolation of a study that says Sadiq Khan and Natalie Bennett have quoted at various points. It's just not true. It's a modelling, there's no evidence to support it.
Becca, it seems to me that Natalie would far rather we carry on buying fossil fuels from Norway because we don't seem to extract it as cleanly. But, I mean, fossil fuel extraction is going to be necessary to shore up our baseload, to make sure we don't have to get energy imported from other countries, and potentially the profits from that could be used to help us move to greener energy rather than actually put it on the bills of ordinary people.
I mean, or we could say that it's a bit of a distraction from actually investing in renewable energies in the UK and trying to create our own energy independence, which I think the last kind of year, having seen the war in Ukraine, has become should be even more of kind of a front of mind focus. And I think I agree with Natalie that the huge problem here is that suddenly climate change is becoming this kind of culture war, political football for the Tory party, when actually it really shouldn't be up for debate. And, you know, they see an opportunity with the win in Uxbridge a few weeks ago over ULEZ, and they now think that there's kind of votes to be won, as in to abandon our commitment to achieving net zero and to prolong drilling in the North Sea is a total.
Why do we have to achieve net zero?
I mean,
save the planet.
But
probably.
is this about culture? Well, Leon, I'm going to come to you here. Is this about culture wars, or is it what the government were arguing? This is about energy security. This is about having sovereignty over how and where we get our energy, making sure we don't have to go cap in hand to the Gulf, go cap in hand to Russia. The situation that we're seeing right now in Niger, where Russia has essentially seized a lot of France's uranium that they use for their nuclear power. Frankly, it's quite dangerous to not do what the government are doing.
Yeah, well, look, there's two things going on here that I see. There's the macro, which is those geopolitics that you say, let's move away from reliance on those hostile states and try and become self-sufficient. And then there's the micro, which is when it starts hitting people in their own pockets. And I think the issue here, and why we're having this debate, is because people are starting to feel it in their pockets. And I think that's unfair, because when you look at what the UK is doing, we are going far beyond what our other counterparts are doing. Yeah. And I think that's not the right thing.
He's right, though, isn't he, Becca? Because the UK emits less than 1% of carbon emissions in the world. China's chugging it out. At the same time, most of the green technology that we're using, solar panels, heat pumps, or whatever, are being made by China. They're getting the profits from this. It's not cutting carbon, and we're just self-flagellating.
Well, we also industrialised far earlier, didn't we? So we kind of owe it to the world.
That's not exactly a good thing to say to people. Oh, it's all right, you've got to suffer because we industrialised earlier.
But shouldn't we also be proud that we're leading the world on this stuff? You know, I don't think anyone should be enviable of China's environmental policy. I don't think that's very cool. To be a kind of global polluter isn't very cool. Whereas actually trying to go ahead of the EU, go ahead of our neighbours, and actually try to achieve net zero before those people, I think is a great thing. We can also get some investment from overseas into green energy. It produces jobs.
That is not much comfort to Mrs Miggins when she's paying green levies on top of super high energy prices. And even Tony Blair has waded into this, hasn't he, Peter?
Well, I just think net zero is a myth. I don't think we'll reach it by 2050. I don't think it's desirable for us as an economy or as a society to reach it by 2050. Everybody wants clean air. Everybody wants to live in an environmentally friendly world. There aren't too many people who want to breathe in terrible fumes or to release too much into the atmosphere. But the fact is that even if we reach net zero by 2050, even if we do every single thing, if we change our economy massively, if we change our entire way of life, we do all sorts of things that need to be done, it's going to cost a huge amount. And at the same time, the big polluters, China, India, the United States, they're not going to do nearly as much as we do. And we can be a beacon, that's fine, but we'll be a poor beacon within the world.
I mean, is this really not the crux of this whole argument, that actually we don't have control over what the world emits, and we actually risk essentially we're living in a world dominated by rather malign communist governments at our own expense if we don't do this?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think this is the big point here. We have to move away from reliance on those types of states. We saw what happened with the Russian war. We saw what happened, therefore, to people's household bills and our economy more generally. And I think we have to be realistic here. Yes, we do want to achieve a clean environment, exactly as Peter says, but it can't be at the expense of national security, and it can't be at the expense of our economy. And I think this is why what Rishi Sunak's announced today is actually quite pragmatic, quite sensible, and actually has popular support, I would imagine, amongst the public at large.
Yeah, I mean, actually, on that, it does have popular support, because we actually asked the public, are you pleased Rishi Sunak has greenlit 100 new licences for oil and gas projects in the North Sea? 89% of people saying yes. TS says absolutely the right thing. Also helps to protect thousands and thousands of highly skilled engineers, manufacturers and services supplying the workforce in the North Sea. I mean, Becca, this does help prop up jobs. We are going to need to do something to help us get to the next level. Even if our end goal is to get green energy, we need to use something to get there. And this is better creating jobs for Brits than jobs for Russians.
But we could create jobs for Brits by investing in renewable energy, couldn't we? Rather than kind of prolonging an industry that will die out by, buying into carbon capture. Like, there are ways to create jobs in Britain and create a green economy, and we've seen it with
Rebecca,
Biden.
Let's have a mix. Let's have a mix.
Or just stick to the plan that we all agreed and ensure that we hit our net zero goals to be a beacon and to encourage other people to follow us and create new jobs and sustainable jobs that will exist and don't rely on a supply of oil and gas.
Yeah, but I think when you look at what's happening, there are jobs to be had in both sectors, and we can't just have a cut-off point where we say, right, you lot who work.
But we do, because we've got a deadline.
But this is why it's
to a deadline.
not sustainable.